Welcome viewers. This is Pratim Ranjan Bose. This is part of the discussion series that Iravati Research and Communication Center holds. In today's episode, we will discuss how and what changed in undivided Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh. As we all know, that the state was divided into two union territories in August 2019. I have with me Professor Dipankar Sengupta. Dr. Sengupta is a professor of economics at the University of Jammu. He was educated in St. Xavier's College, Kolkata, and did his master's and PhD from JNU. He taught in JNU for several years before moving to Jammu. Welcome, Professor. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me on the show.
Sir, you are not only a distinguished economist, but you are also a man on the ground. You have been there for pretty long years and have seen both sides of the world. You have seen the Jammu and Kashmir in the past, and you are seeing it at present. In today's episode, we would like to know the changes that you have seen and foresee in, based on which you foresee whatever happened in last 2 years in the areas of governance and economy. So the first question is, you wrote pretty extensively on the Back to Villages campaign that started in 2019 in Jammu and Kashmir. Can you please explain us how it will help in terms of what is the perspective of the campaign and how it will help in terms of governance and economy? Over to you, Professor.
Okay. Before I talk about Back to Villages, I have to basically talk about what existed previously. You see, after 1992, because of the 73rd and the 74th amendments, democratic decentralization started to evolve into becoming a norm in all the other states of the Indian Union, except for Jammu and Kashmir. Why? Because where Jammu and Kashmir was concerned, to extend this legislation, you needed the approval or rather the concurrence of the state government under Article 370, which was never provided because we know the 72nd Constitution, 73rd and 74th Constitutional Amendment devolved power to the villages, to the blocks, to the districts. And many legislatures, yes, Panchyati Raj, a three-tier institution of democratic governance in the villages. We know that many MLAs did not want it, but since it came from the top in the form of a constitutional amendment, the states had to fall in line. They resisted, but they had to fall in line. In Jammu and Kashmir, because it was afforded some degree of autonomy by Article 370, the legislators and the government had a field day basically garnering and controlling all the resources, and they chose not to extend this amendment to the state of Jammu and Kashmir. There were panchayats. The state had a panchayat.
That is what I was about to ask, that the state had a law. But how was it different?
Look, the state, for one, there was no 3 tiers of governance. The law in itself was not too bad. But what happened was the following. Because it was contained within the state constitution, the union government or the Panchyati Raj ministry would not be able to tell them or direct them to give them the necessary funds that was provided for under the 73rd Amendment. In the 73rd Amendment, there's a mechanism for giving funds. Also under the State Panchyati Raj Act, there was a mechanism for giving funds, but it was more often than not, it was ignored. You see, panchayat elections were used to garner legitimacy. It was not used as a tool to further the cause of decentralized governance. See, in 2011, there was Panchayati Raj elections and the turnout was 80%. Even in places in the valley, which had seen low polling, the turnout was more than 50%. And these panchayats were not given any funds at all. No funds at all. Sometimes they were given 1 lakh rupees per panchayat. What happens with 1 lakh rupees? Now, compare and contrast it with, say, state of Kerala, where 50% of the capital funds is basically done through local bodies. Now, if you look at the amount of resources that Jammu and Kashmir gets,
how is the figure nationally, Professor?
figure nationally for what? Panchayati Raj
Panchayat
agencies?
spending through the rural institutions.
You see, it depends from state to state. There are certain states like Kerala which are clearly an outlier and which give a lot of funds. But there are, see, the fact remains that because of the mechanism, the flow of funds to Panchayati Raj institutions is institutionalized in most states. So if
Right.
you look, people compare it to, compare it to Himachal Pradesh. And when the people of Jammu and Kashmir go to Himachal Pradesh, they see a working Panchayati Raj system with empowered panchayats. This was not the case in Jammu and Kashmir. Now, the question is, even before the 73rd Amendment, when the governor's rule was declared in the state in 2018, the administration decided to hold elections to the Panchayati Raj institutions. But at that same time, some bureaucrats, some civil servants, senior civil servants, far-seeing ones, they understood that given the fact that these institutions had never been allowed to grow, some hand-holding was required. Secondly, the bureaucrats of the state had not been to the villages for a long period of time. It was a very centralized system of governance. This is the paradox. Jammu and Kashmir was autonomous, given Article 370, but its citizens were unfree in the sense that rights that were given to communities in the rest of the country were not given to the people of Jammu and Kashmir. Now, merely holding of elections will not do because there is no experience or institutional memory of how these things are to be done. So the civil servants decided we will tell all our bureaucrats to send 2 nights in the villages where they will gather information and they will also tell people what are
This
their
is when.
powers.
This is
This
when.
is basically starts in 2019.
So
It starts in
post-abrogation.
2019. No, even pre-abrogation and post-abrogation, it basically speeds up. There were 3 phases in all. One phase was acquaint themselves with what was going on. The second one was advisory. These are the powers you have. And the third phase was introduction and dissemination about the various government schemes that existed. You see, and why was this important? Because there was an amendment by which the state Panchayati Raj was changed so as to make it compatible with the 73rd Amendment. Remember, there were no district councils in Jammu and Kashmir prior to 2019 or in the Panchayati Raj Act.
Okay.
Through the extension of the
So the third tier was not there.
third tier was not there, and the third tier was extended to Jammu and Kashmir via the presidential order of 2019, the Jammu and Kashmir Reorganization Act of 2019 and various amendments. And therefore, given the fact that these institutions had not existed before or they were basically throttled, Panchayati Raj institutions were emasculated, block development councils did not exist, and district development councils did not exist. So they felt there was a need to go and tell the people, look, these are your powers, these are your resources, these are the schemes. Now go and do something about it.
So
And that is why,
clearly, I mean, if I talk nationally, clearly,
right,
though the 73rd Amendment came during Narasimha Rao's period, 1992,
right,
but actually the move started with Rajiv Gandhi, who failed to get it through, but he pushed it.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
so we can say roughly from 80s, the national awareness started building, many states started holding elections,
Yes, yes.
etc., etc. So what we can clearly see here is almost a gap of how many decades? 4 decades. 4 decades.
Let us be, I think, let us be fair to Jammu and Kashmir. I mean, even after the constitutional amendments in 1992, many states resisted. Many states resisted. You see, I think chief secretaries had to be sent to jail for a token, to one day token punishment, etc., for not obeying the constitutional mandates, etc.
Yes,
So it took some time.
Bureaucrats had a serious issue with Panchayati Raj.
Panchayati Raj, and so did MLAs, by the way, in many states. In Jammu and Kashmir, of course, there was a legal cover, Article 370, that no act of parliament, in certain subjects can be extended to the state unless there's a concurrence of the state government given to the president, who then issues the necessary orders. And these orders, of course, were not given because nobody wants to hand over power or share resources. Now, look at the irony. The Finance Commission had made allowances for extra grants to certain states which empowered the panchayats. For Jammu and Kashmir, it ran into thousands of crores. The state government did not empower the panchayats, even though it meant the loss of resources for this particular state, because they do not want to hand over power. They wanted to centralize power. And this is what one of the impact of what happened in 2019 was the democratization of the polity, both the urban polity and the rural polity, and empowerment of grassroots communities.
Okay. So how it is now translating into decision making and governance?
Look, this is early days.
And you know, also I'd like to point out here what we saw in West Bengal. We all remember it that after the left, you know, post 1977, when the left front government came in power, so they pushed the Panchyati Raj system. So we saw that the expenditure through rural bodies have increased, and a lot of decision making happening. The power is getting divided between bureaucrats and the political administration. So, yes, 2 years is a little too small, but how do you see things shaping up?
Well, in a sense, it's not even 2 years. The district development polls took place in the early part of this year. It was staggered, okay. Given the law and order situation, it had to be staggered. But remember, you have institutions which have never wielded power before. Okay,
right?
They are unsure about what their powers actually are. Secondly, and very, very importantly, established political parties, you know, the Gupkar parties, they boycotted the Panchyati Raj polls to a great extent to sabotage this particular affair. They were hoping for absolutely no response in the Panchyati Raj elections. There was massive response in Jammu, the Jammu division. There was a tepid response in many parts of the valley. So in a sense, a lot of panchayats, the sarpanchs were elected on the basis of very little votes. Then in the DDC polls, what they tried to do, all
what is DDC,
parties,
Professor?
The district development council,
right?
The Zilla Parishads. Okay.
Zilla Parishads.
What these parties did, they basically came together to form a coalition. So people who had been on the diametrically opposite side of the political spectrum, National Conference, PDP, and then the People's Conference, CPM, etc., they came together to form a coalition where they tried to convert the DDC polls into a referendum on the decision taken by the government. Right. Out of 280 seats, they wanted to capture a majority, and it turned out that even after they formed the coalition, they got less than 40% of the seats. Just imagine, less than 40% of the seats.
And how was the voters turnout?
The voters turnout was, I would say, given the fact that it is winter, and winter in Jammu and Kashmir is very harsh.
Is very harsh.
50% polling, I would say, is very good polling numbers. Okay, very good polling numbers. Okay, and even then, they did not get the majority of the votes. They did not get the plurality of the seats, because people understood that these Zilla Parishad elections are not elections as in the political sense. They are elections for community development. And the people used these elections for the manner in which it was envisaged. So what tried to happen was, what the established political parties did was to prevent a new generation of leaders from coming up. They tried to monopolize power. Even then, in many districts, you see the profusion of young independent candidates actually winning elections. I mean, you go to rural districts like Punch. Most of those elected basically are independent candidates, young candidates, student leaders who fought against established politicians and political parties and defeated them. And that is extremely encouraging.
Who were in a consortium. Right.
Yes. Now, the consortium was more successful in the Valley of Kashmir, although not completely so, far less successful in places like Jammu. So, I see new leadership has been thrown up. And of course, before things could we could do what happened, you had the second COVID wave, which struck, very severely. So, I think it is early days, but the persons who have come into these particular DDCs, they are politically aware, very aware, because there was political participation this time. Now, what will happen is slowly but surely they will know and understand, appreciate what their rights are. And they will start challenging their party bosses sitting in Srinagar and Jammu for influence and for policy decisions. Once they know what the flow of funds are, they will basically try to negotiate some sort of a place for them where they can talk directly to the central government and not basically go through the state government. So the state government, which had a tendency to sit on funds meant for local bodies, I think will no longer be able to do so. You will find slowly but surely, as there was institutional learning in the other states, this process will also take place in Jammu and Kashmir. And given the level of political awareness, I believe it will be faster.
So, if I could put it in a nutshell, what I see is one, there has been not only, I mean, there has been a political class is emerging in the grassroots.
Very much so, very much so.
Right.
And this is independent of the consortium.